A half-century of horror. Stephen King's first novel was published 50 years ago this month. Hi there, everyone. I'm Jeff, and this is Plain English, where JR and I help you upgrade your English with stories about current events and trending topics. This is lesson 669. So that means you can find the full transcript and lesson exercises at plainenglish.com/669. That is thanks to JR, the producer. Well, if you've been with us for a while, you know how this works. We start with a story in the news, something going on in the world, and then we pivot. And I show you how to use an English expression. Today, we'll start by taking a look back at, and I can't believe this, 50 years of Stephen King books. I read them when I was a kid, and I've committed to read another one soon to see how I like them now. Stephen King, if you don't know, is one of the world's highest-selling authors, and his name is synonymous with horror and thrillers. And he has been publishing books for half a century. That is just incredible. In the second half of today's lesson, you'll learn how to use the English expression come together. You might know the word come. You might know the word together, but come together has a very specific meaning, and you are going to learn that in just a few minutes. But first, let's start today's story about Stephen King. A young girl has a mysterious power to start fires with just her mind. Though she can control it as a small child, she struggles to control the fires as she gets older. An evil clown hides in a sewer and lures a small boy looking for a lost toy. An author is in a horrible car crash, only to be rescued by his biggest fan. As she nurses him back to health, she becomes controlling and forces him to write a story the way she wants it to go. These are the plots of Firestarter, It, and Misery. And they're just 3 of Stephen King's 77 books. His first, called Carrie, was published 50 years ago this month. In Carrie, a girl is taunted in school and abused by her mother. She discovers she has telekinetic powers, meaning she can control events around her with just her mind. And soon she begins to use those powers to take her revenge on those around her. In the early 1970s, Stephen King was a high school teacher in Maine. If you picture a map of the United States, Maine is the state that sticks up in the upper right-hand part of the map. While he taught English, King wrote fiction in his spare time. His first published work was a short story called The Glass Floor, which was published in a collection of stories in 1967. He wrote the first pages of another story, but was unsatisfied with how it was coming together. He threw the pages in the trash, where his wife found them. She wanted to know what came next in the story, and she encouraged him to keep writing. And that is how Carrie was born. The book sold moderately well in hardback and got good reviews. But sales really picked up when the paperback was released, and that is when Stephen King found real success in publishing. The rest is history. The name Stephen King is now synonymous with horror, and the author eventually became one of the best-selling fiction writers in all of history. Many of his stories take place in Maine, where he settled and has lived most of his life. The fictional town of Derry, Maine, is the setting of many of his novels. Some involve a connection to the Boston Red Sox, the nearest baseball team. Stephen King often sits in the seats at Red Sox games with a book to read or a notebook to scribble in, and references to the team pop up in his books. How to describe a Stephen King story? Not all of them involve the supernatural. Not all involve terror. Here's how the author himself describes his writing. He said his stories involve things that are inexplicable, things that can't be explained. And in some of his stories, those are vampires, ghosts, or frightening superpowers. But in other stories, disease, violence, and human evil are the things that can't be explained, even if there's nothing supernatural about them. Stephen King says that his stories are about the intrusion of the extraordinary into ordinary life. When writing, he starts with a what-if scenario. What if an alcoholic writer was stranded with his family in a haunted hotel? That question became The Shining. Some of his stories anticipated real-life events. A 1977 novel called Rage describes a school shooting. Actual school shootings in the 1980s and 1990s were similar, and the perpetrators said they were inspired by the book. King decided he didn't want Rage to be published anymore out of fear that it might inspire further shootings. Rage is one of the few Stephen King books that is out of print. Another creepy parallel, the 1978 novel The Stand was about a deadly influenza pandemic. The influenza strain was developed as a weapon, but it escaped from the lab accidentally. A security guard spread the virus to a gas station attendant who spread it to family members. Before long, it couldn't be contained. A majority of the world's population was wiped out. Those few who survived divided into warring factions. The Stand was 1,153 pages, King's longest. It was also one of his most famous. It sold over 4 million copies. It was adapted into 2 different television series, a comic book series from Marvel, and it inspired an album from the heavy metal band Metallica. The Stand was not unusual in this way. A lot of King's books have been adapted to other media. The Shining, starring Jack Nicholson, and The Shawshank Redemption are the most famous movies based on Stephen King books. But Misery, starring Kathy Bates as the crazed nurse, is my favorite Stephen King story on the big screen. 11/22/63 and others were adapted into miniseries. Stephen King isn't afraid to play with the art form. Many writers will stick to novels and short stories, but King has gotten creative not only with the stories, but also with the way he tells them. The Green Mile was a novel-length story released in 6 slim paperbacks, each one released a month apart over half a year. Desperation and The Regulators are 2 long novels that were released at the same time. These 2 books are mirror images of each other, 2 parallel universes experiencing the same story. They have a lot of the same characters in common. The Regulators was published under Stephen King's pseudonym, Richard Bachman, though his identity was not a secret when the 2 books came out. Stephen King is 77 years old and not slowing down. He released a collection of 4 novellas in 2020, novels in each of 2021, 2022, and 2023, and he will publish a collection of short stories later this year. He has won more awards than I can list here, but they include the Edgar Award for Best Mystery Novel, several Bram Stoker Awards for horror stories, and the National Medal of Arts, the United States' highest government award for artists. Barack Obama presented him with that medal. His 77 books have sold between 300 and 400 million copies. And many of those copies wound up on my bookshelf as a kid. I really liked them as a teenager. The first Stephen King book I read was Firestarter, about the girl who could start fires with her mind. In fact, I remember where I was when I was reading a lot of these books. That's the kind of impression they made on me. My parents took the family to Paris when I was 14, I think. I was reading The Tommyknockers. I remember it to this day. It had a green and black cover. Every night, I couldn't wait to get back to the hotel from our activities so I could read that book. Now, all day, as I was wandering through the Louvre and the Musée d'Orsay, all I could think about was the book I was reading. For my birthday one year, I got 2 hardcover books, Desperation and The Regulators. They were released at the same time and they went together. The books were like 2 branches of the same story. They had similar cover designs, and I got them in hardcover. I can remember exactly what the covers looked like, and I remember reading them both that summer in my childhood bedroom. Needful Things was one of my favorites. That was about a store that would sell you anything. It just came at a high price. And then I kind of lost interest. My tastes in books and literature changed. Right around when I graduated from high school, I stopped reading Stephen King books. Years went by and I didn't pick one up. Well, then I read a book called 11/22/63. That's the date on which President John F. Kennedy was assassinated. The premise of the book is that someone has the chance to change what happens on that day and see how the world would be different. I liked it, but it wasn't enough to bring me back into the Stephen King world. But I did pick up a book recently. This will be the first Stephen King book I read in Spanish. It's called The Outsider, so I have that to look forward to. Come together. We use this with works of creativity. When general ideas form into something more coherent, something more complete. When ideas become reality, they come together. What sorts of things can come together? Anything that starts as just an idea and then becomes something more concrete can come together. And come together describes the transformation from just an idea into something like a finished product. Let's start with the written word. If you are asked to give a speech or a lecture or a talk, you might have a general idea of what you want to say. But the speech really starts to come together when you have a draft, when it's organized, when you have a much more concrete sense of what you'll say. Not all ideas come together well, especially in creative works. Gabriel Garcia Marquez drafted a novella called Until August, but he didn't like how it came together. He had ideas, but when it came to actually writing it, he was never satisfied. He had the words, they were there on the page, several drafts, in fact, but he didn't like how it came together. He didn't like how the story developed when he got the words onto the page. He didn't like how it came together. But you can be the final judge on this one. Until August was released by Garcia Marquez's Sons last month. Stephen King famously got his start with the novel Carrie, but he threw the first few pages in the trash. He wasn't happy with how it was coming together, with how the story was developing. His wife convinced him to keep writing. She wanted to know what happened in the rest of the story. Carrie was published as a novel and jump-started the famous author's career. Painters face the same problem. They have a concept, they have an idea, but sometimes when the paint hits the canvas, they just don't like how it comes together. Claude Monet was famous for his paintings of water lilies, but there are paintings we've never seen. He destroyed several of them because he didn't like how they were coming together. He didn't like how the paintings were developing when his ideas hit the canvas. So this is how you use it with creative work. But you can use come together with more mundane, everyday things too. PlainEnglish.com is really well designed, but even I will admit that it's no Monet painting. Even so, we can still use come together. You know, we just made some great improvements to the design and organization of the content. And when I was working with the developers and looking at the drafts, I told them, this is coming together very well. I like how this is coming together. That means I told them I liked how they were taking my ideas and taking my drafts and instructions and making them concrete, actually creating the pages and the templates that we eventually published. If you organize a big event, there are a lot of moving parts. And sometimes a big event starts as just an idea. Maybe you have a location, maybe you have a theme, but you need to plan the event. Let's say it's a conference. You have to create the agenda, reserve the rooms, publicize the event, sell tickets, get the logistics in order. And as you're doing that, you can say a few things. The conference is starting to come together. If you say that, it means that the conference is no longer just an idea. It's now a plan. It's really happening. You can start to really envision how it will go because it's more than an idea. You can also say, the conference is coming together nicely. That means you like how it's going. Your idea is becoming reality, and you like the way it looks now that there are more concrete plans. This conference is coming together nicely. Finally, any master chefs in the audience? There's at least one. That's JR. If you're starting to prepare a meal and you have a pile of ingredients, well, all you have is an idea. But if you start putting the ingredients together and you take a step back and you see that it's starting to look like a final product, you can see in your mind how it will look on people's plates. Well, your meal is starting to come together. Well, that's all for us here at Plain English for Thursday, April 25th, 2024. About a month, maybe 6 weeks ago, we did an update. Like I told you, we did an update to the look and feel and organization at plainenglish.com to the members area after you log in. We made a lot of changes behind the scenes, but also a lot of changes to help you find the right content as quickly as possible. And one of those changes is the full listing of expressions. This is lesson 669. So we have done not quite 669 expressions, but almost that many in our history. And never before have you ever been able to browse them all on one page. But now you can. Just go to plainenglish.com/expressions, or if you're on the website, choose expressions from the Learn menu at the top. And then you'll be on a page that has them all listed from A to Z in alphabetical order. So you can just scan that list and click through to the ones you want to learn. This is a great way to take advantage of all the content that we've created in the past. So check that out, plainenglish.com/expressions, or just choose expressions from the Learn menu at the top of the page. And like I said, I'm really happy with how that page came together. Well, that's it. Have a fantastic rest of your week. We'll be back on Monday with a new topic. See you then.